All right, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. I am your host tonight, DBQ Hams. Thank you for joining us, whether you're watching live, whether you're joining us online in a future date or listening. But I am not alone in our show tonight. Joining me is Swissguard. Swiss, how are you?
Doing well.
Excellent, excellent. I am glad to have you here on the 208th episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is our GX show for September 2nd. It is the beginning of September. This is the first week of school for my kids, maybe for some other kids as well as we head into September. Oh, man. But we got plenty of games to talk about tonight, and joining Swiss and I to talk about games is Game Logic Game. How are you?
Howdy, howdy. We are, as usual, engineering on a wing and a prayer, so let's hope this all holds together.
We'll string it together with some duct tape here. So, yes, this is the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is our GX show. This is our first of two for September. We have every other week here on the GX shows. We'll talk about the games we've been playing, whether it's new games, backlog games, but because, as I mentioned about my kids going to school, because we are parents and grown-ups who game, we also are going to give ourselves a little bit of an assignment every other week. And so we'll talk about that as well. And in those off weeks on the Enough to Keep Going podcast, we'll come at you with our deep dive episodes. Those are our industry news, industry analysis shows. We'll take a step back, kind of look at the news and the trends of the last couple of weeks, and maybe do a little bit of navel gazing as well. But tonight, we got a lot to talk about, gentlemen, and somehow I feel like I've been busy playing a lot of new games, and I am curious to hear what you guys are playing along with our assignment. But I want to start off just by giving a shout out to our other co-host who's not here tonight, Towmaster99, because I am going to talk about Riders Republic without him. I know it is on his list of expected and anticipated and excitable even games for the fall release. He and I both played some open beta. We'll have to wait for his impressions because we did not play together. But the open beta, it was really kind of, I got all excited, and now that I'm starting to think about it, I kind of get a little bit deflated. But it's not because I didn't enjoy the game. It's because I just want to keep playing the game. It is a combination of downhill mountain biking, snowboarding, skiing, wing gliders with jetpacks. How about a bike with a rocket attached to it? It's a little bit of everything. It's got some kooky Ubisoft open worldness in it, in terms of here's a map with a whole lot of population and different types of events. It is made by the Steep developers, the snowboarding game from a few years back. But I think one of the things that sets it apart from the rest of the giant open world Ubisoft games, where here's your map, we populated a whole bunch of things, make your way there. Do you want to fast travel there? Do this, earn this, and open up more things. And I say that in a negative way, but there is this cut and paste nature of Ubisoft combat games, whether they're The Division, whether it's Assassin's Creed, and it leans over into their sports games as well with Steep, and now with Riders Republic. And while that may sound negative, it is pretty functional, because similar to Horizon or Forza Horizon, that you've got a bunch of different events that pop up. You can actually drive, ride there, fly there, but more or less you're probably going to be fast traveling, jumping you in, getting you to those different events. And all of that plays out really well. I really enjoyed it. I kept coming back to it day after day in Riders Republic. But the piece I kept coming back to was their 64-player kind of mayhem event, where you have multiple rounds. There's 64 players, happens once every hour. It seemed like toward the end of the event it was happening more, or the end of the beta weekend it was happening more frequently. But everybody starts it's a 3-round event. First round is 2 different waves, and the next 2 rounds are 3 waves. And you start usually with some downhill skiing or snowboarding, then to a biking. Then in the second round, you get you add in some jetpacks into that, and then you add in some type of random. This one was usually a rocket powered skis or a rocket powered bike. But once the first person crosses the line, the timer starts. You've got 30 seconds to kind of get across the line if you're going to finish. At least in the beta, there wasn't kind of the cutoff of if you didn't cross the line, you didn't move on, kind of like in Fall Guys, where you have this kind of incentive to get across the line in order to make the cutoff from this larger multiplayer event. Here, it still continues to populate you in, even if you didn't, and then kind of averages the score of your 3 rounds. I'll be curious to hear. Let me stop and say, did any of you guys play this? Because I can keep going, but I'm curious if you guys have played it. So maybe I'll save a little bit of this analysis in terms of it when Tao comes back on. But I was surprised, as not a big Battle Royale fan, as somebody who kind of bounced off the physics of Fall Guys, I found myself during the open beta playing this and playing the multiplayer, playing the 64-player event. And if it wasn't spawned in, I would go play something else and come back in a half hour and try to see when it spawned. That was more of the hook than the traditional kind of Ubisoft gameplay here.
The only Battle Royale games that I feel like I've enjoyed are the Nintendo ones, the little ones that they've just kind of thrown out there for fun. So since they're not like cutting you out and like eliminating you, it sounds like this is a little bit more of a, I mean, Nintendo's does like the whole reduction thing as well, but they don't feel as I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Like, there's not as much adrenaline with the Nintendo ones as you would playing like a Fortnite or a PUBG. And so this seems more casual, if that's the right term.
It is. It's an interesting combination because at the start of a round, it's very adrenaline because you end up with 64 players all starting at the top of a hill, and physics are there. So there's many times where I'll get bumped out of a gate and have to do a rewind. And this is an interesting thing in Riders Republic. The rewind feature, unlike Forza, where if you rewind, the entire game rewinds with you. Here, if you do a backtrack or a rewind, only you rewind and everybody else goes forward. So if you miss a gate, you have to rewind in order to hit that gate and keep going. But chances are you're going to end up 4 places, 10 places back by you rewinding and everybody else going forward. And so it's an interesting design decision, and it definitely made me play a little more conservative around some tracks because of that. But as everybody's starting off, all 64 players, the physics are there, and so you do get bumped around. But then once you get past kind of the opening and everybody spreads out, just like in a race, it becomes more about your skill than the kind of competition with everybody else. And so there is that ability, I think, Swiss, of it doesn't have to be a competitive large multiplayer event, that there is the ability of kind of honing your own skills and your own run and finding those right lines.
But it'll be interesting to see how that mechanic plays then, because I mean, what could be created in reality, and as you talk through it, it sounds like one of these things where we see these things both in software and in business, where a policy or a design choice is made thinking only about kind of how it operates and how it functions in an isolated fashion, but doesn't really extrapolate how people will be incentivized to use it and the end results thereof. Because the way you describe it, what it sounds like to be very much, particularly as it plays in what is essentially a racing game, is that the reality will be if you miss a gate, you may as well just drop out of the event.
Yeah, I think if you miss a gate, you're not finishing first. I mean,
Right.
I would miss gates, and my highest was maybe in the 30s. So yeah, I mean, you really end up kind of.
If it's a battle royale, the whole point is to place it first. I mean, it's a king of the hill kind of thing.
Kind of. So this is where the incentivizing, this is where the progression piece comes in. Is so I never finished higher than 34, a lot of times in the 40s, but because of the 3 different events, the skiing, biking, and flying, more or less, you have a progression bar in each of those kind of categories. And so every time you hit a new, you hit a new level of skiing, you unlock a new set of skis or a new snowboard. And so even though I would never finish in the top 10, top 25, I would still be progressing at least most of those different, sometimes I really tanked in a certain event and I didn't get a whole lot of progression, but other times I hit over the course of the beta weekend, I hit the caps in biking and skiing in terms of progression. And so I think they incentivize it by you're still getting some XP just by finishing, even if you don't necessarily finish first.
And then the question then becomes, and it'll depend on how it plays out on the market, is that enough? Now, because again, we're going to talk about Call of Duty tonight. In a lot of ways, that is true for certain aspects of Call of Duty. When you're like, I'm horrible with sniper rifles, right? But you have to grind sniper rifles to level up sniper rifles. So I have to take my licks, right, and take some kind of crappy matches in order to get my teeth into, right, a weapon that's actually somewhat effective. Now, that only balances with me because I do well with other weapons, right? But if it was just so the whole thing that turned me off the Call of Duty and while I stayed away from the franchise for so long was because it was years and years and years and iterations of playing matches and constantly coming up as the bottom person or the second to bottom person in a match. And until the gameplay and myself, whatever that magical combination was, flipped that around, I was not interested in playing Call of Duty. It wasn't enough for me to grind and get that incremental progression if my overall get was to. I mean, it sounds like you're coming in mid-pack, which, one of my statements is always mid-pack for the win. So maybe that is enough, right? But it's for some people, it's just it can potentially that zero fault mentality, right? Which is kind of what it is, which is like if you try, it's like that in a lot of stages in Trackmania. You get to a point where the timing constraint is so tight for your skill level that it just gets to a point where, like, if you miss a thing, like you may as well just start over because you're not gonna make the time.
So, at least this is the negative piece I feel about this is at least in Trackmania, those runs are based on your skill, where here, by the nature of 64 players and collision physics all happening, you may be lining up a great run, or somebody else may come barreling into you and take you out of a gate. And suddenly, I've gone from number 4 down to 24 going downhill. Like I've started off great. I was in the front of the pack, kind of holding my own. And suddenly we came around a corner and I got barreled and I totally missed a gate. And suddenly I'm out of it. And I think that will be an interesting dialogue online in terms of how players bounce out or get frustrated with that or accept kind of those physics.
And that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Swiss.
I was going to say, is it funny when you bounce? Like, is it like Burnout 3, like it's pretty cool? Or is it like rage inducing?
Okay, hold on. I have to let my blood pressure come down. Yes, it is very rage-inducing because there's nothing that I did to impact that. So, right, it is not like, oh, here's a spectacular crash and it looks pretty fun. It is, I got bumped and now I'm stuck in the physics and I can't get back in, and I've lost my ability to feel competitive in this. Now I'm just going to practice. So yeah, it can be rage inducing. I think that becomes a question of how many people kind of quit out in those stages or how many people kind of persevere.
Well, it's kind of interesting through this conversation. You made me both excited about acquiring the game and then dismiss the game.
So this part that we're spending a lot of time on in terms of the 64 player mayhem event is only an event within the rest of the game. Like, the rest of the game was great. I really enjoyed it. There's a lot of variety. It's kind of goofy. It's pretty over the top, but it's self-aware of itself in terms of kind of the dude bro aspect of extreme sports. It's not taking itself seriously. And so there's a lot to engage with, and potentially that helps balance out some of the, I could see where the multiplayer event could be a hook, but it could also be something that they're trying with. They're going to iterate on it and try to create something, that has some sustainability to it.
Well, much as in very similar vein to the way a lot of the conversation around Ubisoft has been in some circles that I've been in this week, it's really going to come down to how Ubisoft puts all of that together and how they use it to gate your progress. There's so many elements of things that you're mentioning that have been turnoffs to me in the past. Not saying that I'm turned off to this game, but like to aspects of the game. Like, I used to hate Forza in the way that, kind of going back old school to, not just Forza, but lots of multiplayer games where that, you would be in a pack of friends, you would start playing a game, but the game, and all games to a certain extent are heavily pinned on how much time you invest in them, right? But just having to spend like 100 hours playing Forza because if you went into an online match and you hadn't unlocked like the best cars, and there was no point in you being in the online match. And even when you played with your friends, people were supposed to be your friends, right? You go into a match and people don't use, I'll call them the gentlemanly cars, right? People pick the bangers, right, that everybody doesn't have unlocked, and then it's just not competitive, and there's no point in being there. So it's just gonna
be. I thought of that. I mean, I thought of that because as you're unlocking bikes and skis, you are getting speed increases with those. So when I'm playing a 64 player again, going back to, I could just play the single player and not engage in the multiplayer aspect. And there's it's an Ubisoft game. There's a ton of game there. But if I'm going to engage with the multiplayer part, seeing the person who comes in first having 200 stars and I have 30, and I know that every time I get a star, I'm unlocking some things. Yeah, it seems reasonable that their bike is pretty well decked out to make a pretty quick speed run. So it will be interesting to see how that stratification ends up happening. Like, realistically, given my gear, is getting above 40 pretty good because I'm slow based on the gear that I'm having? Or how do they balance for that? And so I think that'll be an interesting development kind of hurdle to see how they attempt to balance for it, or is this Destiny where they nerf or kind of balance some guns, or is this Destiny 2 where there's stasis class that has no balance to it? So
well, Swiss is going to talk about a game from a vendor that he and I are both fans of, wargaming.net, and in this it sounds like the Battle Royale would really be suited to doing what wargaming.net does, which is you go into a battle and battles are tiered. And so you can't be mixed in with somebody who's driving a vehicle who's like ridiculously above like your level, and it seems like that would be a preferable mix to the way this is. Have you seen, or did you get any visibility during the beta, or have you read or anything what the microtransaction model is going to be like? Because again, this is a game where, again, I've backed off of the argument of pay to win, like over, right? But if people are able to pay to get into those higher speed levels,
it's a cosmetic microtransaction. Okay. So there is a store right, just off to the right of the multiplayer event, but it's all cosmetic. It is goofy giraffes and a variety of different costumes and skater gear. Yeah, it's cosmetic. You've got tiers. You can pay real money. Well, in the beta you couldn't, but you could see how there's two different currencies. There's like a cash currency that you win or earn, or you could buy, and then a coin currency, which you also earn. So yeah, it is cosmetic. And I think that helps level the playing field. But then again, you're going to end up with not necessarily a pay to win have and have nots, but the people that have invested the time, and rightfully so, that they should be able to, see the benefits of their time investment as well. So it'll be interesting to see if that multiplayer mode gets traction, or if people kind of lean back in the traditional extreme sports aspect of this game.
Yeah, my guess is it is going to get a lot of traction. You look at I have the game right, at Race Driver, at Race Grid. When you look at Grid Autosport, I think it is, that's on Stadia, like that 64 car mode is like the one that is like the most like there's always people race that mode. You can never not find a match. So I mean, what'll be interesting then is if that's the case, what is the tail on that? Like, does that last for 3 months, 6 months, or whatever? Then the game peters out. Curious.
All right. Yeah, it's, again, really surprised myself in how much I came back to it. So overall, great package. Definitely some questions in terms of design and kind of what type of traction it ends up getting. Another game that came out that seemed to not get a whole lot of traction, but also surprisingly listened to a few podcasts in corners, Aliens Fireteam Elite. The general consensus is it's a pretty enjoyable game. It's not going to set the world on fire. There's a reason it's a budget game. But if you got some friends or an affinity for the Aliens franchise, there's a lot to like. And that's been my experience. I've only played a couple nights of it. It is a third-person kind of Left 4 Dead-like game. I think I had more fun. I know I had more fun with Back 4 Blood, but that's also because I was playing with a group. And I could see, like, if I was playing this with a group, it could be just some dumb fun as well. And I say dumb fun because so far, at least in the first campaign, so the setup is there's 4 different, maybe expandable to more campaigns. Each campaign has 3 different story segments in it, or multiple different story segments in it. I've only played through the first campaign. You're on an alien ship. I mean, you're on a Federation ship, whatever the lore is within the Aliens universe, right? Like, this happens about 30 years after Aliens, after all of Ripley and that aspect. So people are aware of xenomorphs. You're kind of not surprised in that aspect. And so you're mowing down xenomorphs as if they were zombies. And in some ways that's fun because it's empowering, and also some ways it takes away from the tension. And so I say that because I started the game on the edge of my seat, pretty tense, because of the experience with the franchise, because of the last Alien game, the Alien Isolation, where just a single encounter with the alien is going to kill you. And now, they're dropping out events, they're coming around walls, they're scurrying on the ceiling, they're coming on the floor, attacking from behind, all these different pieces. I was very tense, but the more I played, the more I realized kind of the design of the game, and like, okay, I've got a radar. I know they're going to come this way. I can see when they've gated me into a certain area, and they're going to kind of flood at me. And it's still pretty satisfying to mow down aliens with a machine gun because they're aliens, but it changes the dynamic, right? It becomes a fun. The one thing I kept thinking about with this game is it feels like Earth Defense Force in that kind of like you're just kind of spraying the gun around and killing everything around you, and that's enjoyable, and it's even more enjoyable with friends, but it doesn't necessarily change the dynamics of this kind of co-op shooter. So it's fun, but whether or not it's, you know, in a fall full of different co-op shooters, if this tracks, I could also see that at $20 it becomes a really easy pickup for people who enjoy the franchise to have a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
Game logic you were going to ask?
Yeah, once you went through that part where you mentioned that the tension was removed, like behind my eyes and inside, like my morale on this game just took a deep nosedive. Like, because what I remember from my childhood, you know, the appeal of the Aliens franchise is the lore, you know, and again, I'm guilty of not being like a super huge guy to dig deep on lore, but like the value of that property is the lore. And when you even look at the movie, when you look at I can't even remember the title of the super huge, the big
Prometheus.
Yeah. When you look at Prometheus, when you skate away from the centric themes of that lore and what's been previously depicted on screen, it just like loosens up and loses its value. Prometheus may have been a decent tale, but was so far skewed away from the movies, right, and what we had seen, that it just was unpopular. In that vein, the analog that I'm targeting is what I remember from my childhood about that series in particular was Aliens, right, the second movie. That was the thing that was like my brother and I had the script memorized, and like we could go through it, and all of the, you know, God rest his soul, you know, Bill Paxton, and, you know, like all the characters in that, and the lines. Like, but also that tension of like Marines down on the planet, constantly looking in every corner, something feasibly jumping out of every shadow. You know, what I would be looking for in a game like that, in that setting, would be, I knew it wasn't going to be Alien Isolation, and it wasn't going to be that much of a, you know, I know the mechanics work that, but I'll call it a tank, you know, survival horror kind of game. I knew it wasn't going to be that, but I wanted that feeling of almost kind of always being at the edge of being overwhelmed. And this just sounds like it's like when I play Left 4 Dead and Back 4 Blood, like I don't really feel threatened. Like I never really am like worried or scared, like that I can't surmount the challenge, right? It's just a matter of effectively tactically deploying and covering down on all the corners, right? And the team working together. It's not the super tense ridden, right, experiences that some other games are. And I was just, if this is just, you know, shoot the zombie palooza like a bunch of pumpkins, right, sitting on a fence, then I just don't know what the effectiveness is of grounding that in the Aliens like lore and franchise.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that because I started that way. I started in I'm creeping around corners, I'm looking for things to jump out at me, and when I got used to, okay, I'm going to hear this scream, I'm going to hear them scurrying, and I'll be able to kind of get that. It did take away some of the tension, but I still have to say that when one of the larger ones that it's walking up on two legs jumps on top of you and I have to mash some buttons, even if it is just simply mashing buttons, because of that psychological aspect of the James Cameron movies, of, you know, Alien 3 and the original, all of those kind of psychological context still resonates. But yes, I mean, right, like the challenge here is that it resonates if you have that context. If you're just coming to it for like a goofy, you know, for a fun shooter with some friends, you're not going to have that same type of scare. I mean, it is not, it normalizes the xenomorphs by the sheer nature of sending so many waves after you. And so I think that is the challenge of making this a game, is that how do you keep that tension without kind of losing the action aspect of a game. What were you going to say, Swiss?
Oh, that was going to be exactly my comment of, you're coming into it with a background in the IP, but I don't like to think of myself as old, but like Aliens came out a long time ago. And there are a lot of gamers that probably haven't seen it yet. So if I may, like I kind of want to hijack the agenda, because this conversation dovetails directly into the game that I have for my PickZ PlayZ, which is
the floor is yours, sir.
All right. Mecha Knight's Nightmare. So this is me trying to be experimental. And I went on Steam, and actually the bane of Game Logic's existence, trying to use Steam to like find a new game and see what was out there. And this one, I guess, had come out on the 30th, and it seemed to have like a few good reviews. Like they were, positive overall. And it was like I think $15, single developer type thing. So, and the reason why it, I'm hijacking the chat here is because it is it's the same thing. It's like a horde type game. And so they wanted to do that with like the mechs, and I'm kind of a sucker for mechs. I grew up watching Gundam, and these mechs in this game are very quick. So I wasn't expecting too much for the graphics or anything. It's a single developer. They were functional at best. But you get waves and waves of these lumbering alien things, and you just shoot them. Where when Game Logic, because you were talking and saying like there's no tension, and maybe it's just this type of game, and it's very like, it seems like if you're getting overwhelmed, it would create tension, but for whatever reason in Mecha Knights you don't get that. And basically it's because they're just lumbering around attacking you, and you, like you said, shoot them just like a bunch of pumpkins. And the only reason why you feel like you might get overwhelmed is you're running out of ammo or something. And so some of the suggestions for Mecha Knight's Nightmare was Earth Defense Force, like you said, DB, Doom Eternal, and Ace Combat. So I feel like it had the same flaws of Doom Eternal, where I'm just running around, and because there's ammo limitations, that's what's artificially trying to create the tension. And then they had I think they tried to do the story like the way that Ace Combat tells the story. And this is in addition to it just wasn't terribly effective, but the storytelling is makes Michael Bay look like Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, it was like
ouch. Wow.
it was horrible. So just that voice acting and just the cheese. And so I returned it. I played enough in the Steam window, and we get that 2-hour window. I played enough to get a good sense of it, and knowing that I wasn't going to continue with it, I got a refund. But it's I don't know. What games have you guys played that have done that mechanic and actually succeeded with the overwhelming things?
I think we're kind of talking about it in a different context, because we're kind of skewing around to this notion of horror-oriented storytelling. But I think whether it's horror or not, when you get down to the mechanics and essentially the speed of the game, we're really talking about something that Star Wars Republic Commando comes to mind, but more timely, more a game with greater recency is Rainbow Six Vegas. Like when you're going through the campaign, you can't just charge into a room and mow everything down, right? And maybe part of this is a design mismatch where the thing that we'd be looking for, at least in the alien setting, would be more of a cover shooter. Because, and maybe to a certain extent, I can't remember, did Fear have co-op in the multiplayer campaign?
I don't remember.
I can't remember, but I just, that is another game that I felt like you can't just charge into a room and like spray. So Left 4 Dead is a game of just how many bullets you put out per second and in what vector, right? Where your firing lines converge and where are you covering. And that's kind of the maximum complexity of figuring out that combat geometry, right, in a given level. And then how you move that covering fire set of vectors right down range and through and traverse the level. But then you talk about something like a Rainbow Six, right, where it's like, no, there's things coming in from lots of different angles, and the combat geometry is always shifting, and you have to cover, and that cover causes a slight shift in the geometry, and then the simple act of like one person moving to a different covering spot and putting down fire in a different vector, and the level and degree of cover that they have also highly changes that, which is similar in a lot of ways, very similar in a lot of ways to the Division 2. And that's part of what creates the tension, because it's the combination of like, you don't necessarily know where everyone's coming from. You don't necessarily know that you have everyone sighted, targeted, and identified. The tension goes way up when you start getting popped and taking damage from a vector that you thought was clear, but it wasn't. And then when that's constantly shifting, reinforcements are coming in, that type of thing. And that, to me, when I think about a scene in Aliens, the movie, that's the problem, right? The problem is the Marines come into a room. The problem is when you think you have everything covered, right? I can remember Vasquez saying, "Here they come. They're coming from over there," and the aliens pop up over the lab tables, right? And everything's good as long as all the bullets are going down range in that direction. But as soon as an alien comes out, and that's an inherent endemic like tactic of the aliens and the capability that they have, is that they can traverse the level in many ways that a human being can't. And so while you're focused and you think you've got everything covered, you're constantly under threat of threats coming in from directly from your side. You think about kind of Jurassic Park, right, as well, right? The velociraptors coming in at the 90-degree angle. From above you, right? Who was the guy who got, it wasn't Hicks. I can't remember who, like the alien came out from underneath him, like, and grabbed him and dragged him out. Like, that's the kind of tension that I feel like is applicable to that setting. If you don't have that, then if I want to be really pretentious about it, I say it's not Aliens, and it's just every other 4-person co-op shooter that's coming out. And when I rewind some of these conversations we've been having over the summer, I wasn't wrapped around the axle that there's a glut of these shooters coming out. I love these types of shooters, and I love Left 4 Dead. But from a business perspective, if you flood the market with a bunch of them and none of them differentiate in pacing and threat level and complexity, then they're all just going to land, and you're going to be like, pick one or the other. It doesn't really matter. So, DBQ, just to go back to you, I wanted to ask, was Aliens Fireteam on Game Pass, or did you actually pay out for that game?
GameFly'd it. So
Okay,
I rented it through GameFly. Played it on an Xbox. I think we're slagging on it, but there's also some fun to be had in this game. And so I think, what you described to Gasicles of like looking around corners or seeing the choke point and knowing that you've got alternate routes that somebody could come. I totally did that for the first, like, in that kind of Left 4 Dead wave of, okay, you need to start up the elevator and it's going to bring in a horde. It brings it, there's enough avenues off that main spot that even though and this is where the mentality of the franchise overrode my gaming mentality, is that even if I know that there's a mini map and there's not any clicks on the mini map, I also know that there's something on my 6 and there's another hallway on my to my right. I kept looking down those areas anticipating something was coming. And once I kind of that was the most tense moments of that game, is when I didn't know. And it's very possible that as the campaign ramps up and I get into other ones, that some of those things do happen, or maybe that is based on the difficulty. I was playing on normal and there's 2 cranks higher than that. So maybe that starts spawning, aliens in more different avenues. But there is, I mean, I was chuckling there because that's exactly how I was feeling, and it didn't play out to that same extent. And so while it can be fun, it may not be as tense as you would anticipate. But at the same time, going back to the last thing I want to say about this, and we'll move on, is the reason you came to Aliens is for the lore, is for the world. And one of the things that this game does really well, even if the gameplay is kind of standard, it really does well with the lore. I mean, it throws you in 30 years afterward. It seems to be based in the same universe as Alien Isolation. So an Alien Isolation is based in the original franchise because you play as the daughter of Ripley. And so there's all this other context here. It plays nicely with, in the first mission, you're rescuing some scientist who doesn't have time for you as the Marines, and you kind of, you get a number of, you realize how kind of, it reminded me of the Paul Reiser character from Aliens, right? Like, you realize how despicable the corporate aspect is within this world, because you're rescuing somebody and they don't care anything about you as your life, and all they're trying to get is their research out, or that the aspect of you as a grunt, as a Marine, really hits home. And so they do some nice things with the narrative. It is, yeah. So I mean, I think your mileage will vary based on your affinity for the franchise, and if this game is going to end up being a $20 game this fall. I'm sure if you have any interest or passion for the franchise or nostalgia for the franchise, there's $20 worth of fun in that at some point in time. So, all right, I'm going to spend more time on that than I thought I would, but that was a good discussion. Thank you, gentlemen. I will kind of shortchange this last game that I played. It's a small little indie game, Arietta of Spirits. It is out on everything, PC, Switch, on Xbox and PlayStation. It is kind of, I played it this summer it was an Xbox demo during E3 and also on Steam, and picked it back up. I enjoyed it at the time. I played the demo of it. It's kind of a modern Zelda-like, but the scope is surprisingly really small. To say it plays out like a Zelda-like, it plays out like a Link to the Past. But you are a young girl, your grandma has died, your parents are staying at your grandmother's cabin on an island. So by the nature of it being on an island, you've kind of contained your geography, and you realize that you are kind of a conduit between the spirit realm and the real world. And there are things to go do, that there has been problems, and it all stems from this, abandoned mine on the island. And so like a Zelda game, like a 2D Zelda game, you're slashing and rolling, you're cutting down bushes to get hearts, but there's some mechanics. There's an additional mechanic from the slash and the roll, is that you have almost a bubble, and that bubble is a shield, but you have a certain amount of time that you can deploy it. You get that toward the later half of the game, or the later third of the game, and that really becomes an interesting mechanic, because you can use that bubble to stun an enemy. It breaks down their defenses, and so it evolves combat a little bit. Once you get into, I really enjoyed the gameplay of this by the end. And by the end, there's a lot more going on. There's almost some bullet helly aspects of lots of icons coming at you, lots of, magic orbs coming at you, and you have to run a certain spot, pop up your bubble, let them deflect, run again and let your bubble recharge. And, so there is this kind of back and forth, or there's a mechanic in there where you can deflect them and that bounces back on a boss. So it gets pretty good. I mean, it gets pretty advanced and evolved in terms of its gameplay, but it comes really at the end of the game. And I say that more disappointed than anything, that I wanted more of this game. And the story really, it was a lot more heartfelt than I expected for this type of game. That there's, because of being bound between the spirit realm and the real world, you're helping people move on, or you're helping spirits move on. And so there's some touching story aspects to this. All of that said, this game is made by 3 people. There was one person doing story, music, and sound effects. There was one person programming, and one person doing the art, the pixel art. And there, so it's a small Finnish studio. And once I found that part out, like, I understood more of the scale of it. Like, okay, so yeah, the overworld's maybe not as populated, or it's not as big of a game as I would hope for, but for 3 people and for one person listed as the programmer, it's a pretty impressive feat in terms of putting this together. It ends up being like a 3.5, 4 to 5 hour game, depending on if you want to go hunt down all the little collectibles, but you could probably get through the story in about 3.5 to 4 hours. But it's $15, $20 and a very accessible Zelda-like feel-good story. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Okay, we have made our way well past our time into our new game. So thank you for indulging me. And Swiss, I'm glad to hear about your game, even though you did return it. So, but yeah, looking at those screenshots of it, it definitely has an Earth Defense Force type of feel to it in terms of that game of Mecha Knights. So our assignment, gentlemen, was to, given all the Fortnite crossovers, when we gave ourselves this assignment, the Fortnite crossover was the Free Guy Ryan Reynolds movie. Who would have thought that in the time that this assignment came out, there would also be a Will Smith Bad Boys crossover that has happened in the Fortnite universe. Wow. So as Fortnite continues to pull in a variety of properties and IPs, that is what our assignment was, in terms of looking at kind of ways where our games have crossed outside of the gaming realm, where they've gone and grabbed other licensed properties, real world entertainers, existences, things that kind of cross outside of that franchise. And so we've got a couple different options here at Game Logic. You and I feel like we have the most, what I was thinking as straightforward to this. But Swiss, I'm going to turn it over to you, because you're representing some marketing garb here on your cross marketing, cross licensing here. So explain to me what's going on in World of Tanks and how this ties into our assignment.
All right. So I didn't really know what to do for the assignment until I got an alert on my phone from my favorite band on YouTube, Sabaton, that they released a new single, and it just happened to be in conjunction with a new event in World of Tanks. So Sabaton is a power metal band out of Sweden, and pretty much all their songs and albums are related to like military history, and they're very like pro soldier. So given that, like, I'd say a good third of all their songs are like tank related, this like actually is like a pretty
very logical connection here.
Yes,
yeah.
A very logical connection. There's like a new tier 9 Swedish tank that they did, but like I think wargaming.net probably did a lot of the art for the music video that they put out. Steel Commanders. But so they did that, and I was like, you know what? I've been meaning to try. I like World of Warships, and so I figured I'd try World of Tanks. I will note though that Sabaton, when they did a World of Warships crossover a few years ago with their single Bismarck about the German battleship, and they've also done tracks for both Europa Universalis 4 and Hearts of Iron 4. So like all these military strategy games, like it makes sense that they do crossovers with them. But yeah, as far as World of Tanks is concerned, I think I like World of Warships better. And I enjoy the little bit that it felt very wargaming.net. Everything was familiar to me, even the controls are familiar. But while I really enjoyed the fact that I was like in some really cool like European countryside or like some mountains, like the terrain and everything was really nice compared to the ocean, like in World of Warships. I enjoyed the combat of World of Warships a little bit better. I seem and this might just be because I'm a noob with World of Tanks, but I liked it. The different classes of ships felt like I feel like I play them differently, and maybe I just haven't gotten far enough from World of Tanks to like experience that yet. But I don't know. I just the pace and everything in World of Warships seem more fun. So we'll see. I'll try to level up and get like maybe to tier 3 or 4 consistently and see if that changes things a little bit. But I don't know.
All right.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's
go ahead. Game.
It's an interesting dynamic between those two games, and I have spent more time playing World of Warships. Interestingly enough, World of Tanks was generated on my playlist before I saw you put this on the agenda, Swiss. So I had spent today installing it over on another PC to play some this weekend and stream a little bit of it. It's more complex than World of Warships. I feel like there's like more. I kind of think of them now as microcurrencies. That in World of Warships there are fewer. I think maybe some of those are a little more buried too. The only thing I think you can use coal for is like to buy signal flags. So I'm like 99% of the time I'm hardly ever even conscious of that particular currency. So there are more things like that in World of Tanks. World of Tanks also is a little more bothersome in it constantly like nagging you about like you always have to replenish and pay for your ammo that you expended like the previous round. And so like there's this constant thing of like I don't have enough ammo to go around all the tanks, and just there's a lot more details to micromanage. I feel like in World of Tanks, some of that takes a little bit of the fun out of it. There are some tactical nuances, like playing a tank killer vehicle takes significantly different tactics than playing just a regular high mobility tank, and then there's the different classes and speeds, medium, heavy, and whatnot. So it gets into that difference a little bit between like a destroyer and a battleship and a cruiser kind of thing, like you have in World of Warships. But it's World of Warships is probably my favorite because it reduces the complexity enough while still keeping it high enough to be interesting. World of War Tanks is less of a grind than World of War Planes was, which I dropped. But so there's differences between the two. They're both still highly. World of Tanks is also much more highly dependent, I feel like, on what everybody else does, right? Whereas in World of Warships, like if somebody doesn't come with you or you don't follow somebody else, the battle can still unfold favorably. But in World of Tanks, like if somebody doesn't go with you and you're not at least like in a group of like 2 tanks and you're just all and people are running around doing foolishness, then like the match is going to go nowhere. The enemy team is just going to pick you off one by one. So it's a little more dependent, but at the same time, like nobody talks in the game. So unless you're already like friends with somebody, so I don't know. It's still fun though, but there are some kind of marked differences between it and World of Warships. So it's interesting to hear your toe dip into it.
I think I need to spend more time with it really to start picking up on a lot of that. But I don't know. I probably didn't really appreciate World of Warships until you and I had that one session, and I really kind of started to grasp the different ways to play. So we'll see.
All right. So game logic. Well, I may have taken my free content with the New Day wrestlers in Gears 5. Did you actually bite the bullet and buy your Rambo and John McClane suits and skins and weapons in Black Ops Cold War?
I probably so I don't think I'm pretty sure I don't have the Bruce Willis skin. I do have the Rambo skin, and of course these skins came out. I want to say 2 seasons ago, and actually season 3.
They were over the course of the summer that they were out.
Yeah,
Yep.
so we're in season 5 now. I did pick up the Rambo skin, and I have the Rambo. I guess I think that came in a bundle, so it came with like a bunch of other stuff. So I do have I think it's called the First Blood skin for like some assault rifle and something else. So so I do have that stuff. And to be quite honest, like it really doesn't make any difference in the game. Like it's just a skin. So um, it's
all just cosmetic.
yeah. I mean, I think the most interesting thing with Bruce Willis and Rambo, again, 2 seasons ago, but when those characters were deployed, you also got different modes. And so with Rambo, there was a variation on gunfight. I think it was called Rambo's Gunfight or First Blood Gunfight or something like that. And so gunfight is a mode. If I have it correctly, it may be called something else, but it takes place on small maps. It's I want to say it's 3v3. I think is the primary mode, but basically maybe it's 6v6. I can't remember. But it's a mode where well, actually it's I'm getting them mixed up. There's gunfight blueprints, and then there's this other mode. I think it's called gunfights. But at any rate, what it is that when you score a kill, and I think the first kill you have to score 2 kills, your weapon levels up. So you normally start off with like pistols, and then when you get 2 kills, it then levels up to like a submachine gun, and then when you get 2 kills, it levels up to an assault rifle, and then it keeps leveling up. And so there's a particular dynamic to that mode because one of the hitches that happens is in one of those switches you will get switched to a weapon that is not full auto, it's semi-auto, and so there's always the risk that you're going to shift to a weapon, and if you don't know that weapon is semi-auto, you'll go into an engagement as you run up on somebody and hit the button and leave your finger on the firing button, and it'll just fire like a 3-round burst, and then nothing will happen, and you'll get killed. So there's that. And then it also has this interesting dynamic.
Sounds like personal experience.
yeah, many times. And then it also has this interesting dynamic where typically the second to last weapon, I want to say, is something like super derpy. So it's like you level up, and then you take a sharp pitch down and you're forced to get, I want to say, your second to last kill, or maybe even your last kill, with something like just really nerfed, like like maybe the Magnum pistol, which has huge impact when you hit somebody with it one time, but it also fires very slowly, or you might get a melee weapon or something like that. And so the Rambo mode or whatever that came out like that was specifically involved like weapons that you might typically have seen him with in the movie franchise. So that was more impactful in terms of the wrapping of pop culture oriented IP into the game. So those skins still remain. So I still have like my Rambo skin and use it a lot of times. It's very interesting in Call of Duty. A lot of times you will see people in skins kind of playing the way that skin, like you see, like you'll see people with that Rambo skin on who are running around doing their melees because they're trying to level up their melee weapons, but that's like very frequently the skin that they wear because it fits, it's thematically correct. So it's been interesting to see those skins linger on in the game and how people kind of employ them and use them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a little bit of role playing there in terms of getting the character along with it. So let's jump into a little more role playing in the rest of our segment here as we move into our round robin. I thought I was going to be playing some action adventure role playing game. Well, not really role playing, but Baldo, the Guardian Owls. This was out on Switch. It's kind of Studio Ghibli like, kind of Zelda like adventure. I upped my subscription to Apple Arcade again to give it a try. And I'm realizing that if I kind of want to play it, but I probably need to make sure I spend some time with a controller. So don't have a lot to report on it. Right, reasonably so. It's hard to play a Zelda-like Ni no Kuni Studio Ghibli type of game with a touchscreen. And so I'm going to sit on that.
And why'd you choose to do it on Apple Arcade, though?
Because I could pay $5 versus $25 to give it a try. How about that? And
makes sense. I'm now looking at it on the Switch and I see the price tag. So
but I will say it's really, I enjoyed what I've played so far. It is a beautiful game. It is kind of in that Ni no Kuni Studio Ghibli like setting. There's a little bit of, it's developed by a small team. It's been in development for the last 6 years or so or more. So there's a lot to like here. I'm definitely going to come back to it. But I also very quickly, because of the beauty of the art, I found myself wanting to play it on something other than my iPad in order to not get the jagginess of the graphics. I wanted smoother lines for the animated style. But it's very enjoyable if people have enjoyed Zelda-like 3D Zelda-like games rather than my 2D Arietta of Spirits Zelda-like game. I think there's a lot to enjoy here. Some puzzles, a little bit of combat, but a really beautiful art style.
What kind of controller do you normally use when you're with your iPad when you're playing Apple Arcade?
I just hook up my PlayStation 4 with Bluetooth.
Okay.
So
no, I was just curious because I think people. It seems like people tend to pick one or the other, even when they own both systems. So I'm just often curious about whether or not it's people picking the controller that otherwise they wouldn't use, right? Because
I will say I have 4 PlayStation 4 controllers, and so that is usually why I've synced one with my iPad, because I have fewer Xbox controllers.
Right. And the other thing I want to eventually figure out how to figure this out. But I also wonder, with regards to Apple Arcade, again, that conversation we had maybe a few weeks ago, I was talking about Stadia, but with Apple Arcade and things that run natively on the iPad, I wonder if those jaggies that you're seeing, I wonder if they look better on an iPad, on a higher end iPad. Because you and I have the same model. I just use like the education iPad or whatever. I just wonder if there's any difference in the graphic rendering.
Yeah, I do wonder about that too, and I wonder what it looks like on, or even on Apple TV. Like, what is that going to look like blown up? That is always a question that I have playing Apple Arcade games. Is this looks okay here? How's it going to look on a TV? Or this looks kind of rough here. How's it going to look on a TV? But yeah, again, Apple Arcade continues to impress me, or at least continues to remind me that it exists and gives me a reason to come back to it. They've added a whole lot more in terms of some of their classic games. There's more stuff coming out. There's a Professor Layton game coming out on Apple Arcade. There's a Lego Star Wars game coming out on Apple Arcade. So I find myself, it's easier to justify the $5 a month to sample a whole bunch of things than it is to plunk down $25 for this one game that I know I wanted to play, but I wasn't sure how committed I was going to be to it. So that's how I end up here. Speaking of games that I used to be really committed to, but now I'm not so much, Let's talk about our Destiny minute here, gentlemen. New season came out, Season of the Lost. I played a little bit, ran through the opening mission, and then actually, because I installed it back on my Xbox, I played a little bit of Crucible rather than being on PC and having some hacking issues. But Game Logic, you've been playing more Destiny 2 back on PC. What brought you back into it? Is it just part of your rotation or the new season?
All of those are applicable. A lot of it is just, I'm letting go of some past obsessions with like playing tons of different games, and like right now, maybe a disappointment to you gentlemen, but like I'm not today as wrapped around the axle about whether or not I've played like 12 to 24 new games as we head into like the gaming superlatives discussion for the end of the year. I'm really just like whatever I really want to get game time in, I'm allowing that to come into the rotation in competition metrically against, playing new games. And I'm
So
trying
are you saying that you're just playing the games you like and love
Yeah.
versus what you feel obligated for?
Yes. Although there is some feeling of obligation to these season pass oriented games as a service, right? And cultivating the progression of, my Green Lanterns in the Destiny universe, so to speak. So, Destiny 2 is in my rotation. The games that I have stacked into that rotation for games as a service and season pass type stuff is Destiny 2, Call of Duty, World of Warships, World of Tanks, and Dual Universe. And Call of Duty is a thing now that I'm playing it every other gaming rotation, and I'm filtering some of these other things in between in the alternative in the alternating gameplay sessions. But Destiny 2, I came back to on PC. I same as you. I kind of, because they don't really give you much choice. They always now jam you into whatever the new content is for that season. Right off the bat, you don't get any choice about that. Something that Destiny is going to have to contend with, right, as they build out all this lore, is there's some jankiness, which I'm sure you can work around if you put your mind to it. But you go into that Season of the Lost content, and after completing that first mission, your next point of contact is Varix. And so I'm playing my hunter, who is my legacy main on that I played the campaign through entirely on PC, but that character has not completed Beyond Light. So I took that character to Varix, and instead of getting the Season of the Lost intro and dialogue, I got wherever I had left off in my midway playthrough Beyond Light. Now, I'm sure I can get out of that and get back to the Season of the Lost thing, but I didn't bother. I was like, fine. I need to do Beyond Light to level this thing anyway. But like,
I love how you're pushing the systems to see like what happens if
Yeah, well, these are the things that get surfaced when you didn't merge all accounts, right? Because you see all these permutations and variations of like jank that other people might be exposed to if they're not like Destiny diehards, like we are, so to speak. So there was that. There were some niceties that have been added in this season. And maybe it was added in a previous season and I didn't catch it. It seems like it just got added this season. There is now like a timeline.
that just
archive.
came this season. Yeah, the timeline up on the director.
Yeah. So now
that's actually pretty interesting.
It is. It's pretty neat, and it's not forcing me, but it's opening me up to the option of, I'm going to go back and read up a little bit on some of these lore things that I've missed. Like, I don't know why Queen from the whatever thing is important. I saw her in the Red War campaign.
Sabaton.
Yeah. Oh no, not her, but the Mara Sav. Is that it?
Oh yeah.
So
Awoken, right? Who in theory died during the Taken King and now came back during Forsaken.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like,
and Stitch is smiling at me because I'm name dropping and he's following along and it's working out just fine.
Right. Yeah. So there's bits and pieces, like there's pieces of lore that I dug deep on and that stick with me, and then there's pieces that like I dabbled in or didn't pay attention to or tiptoed across, and so it creates like these gaps, right? These crevices in like a line of continuity that I don't have. But that little timeline thing is neat because it helps you piece all that back together. But it just, again, it creates that curiosity, and then I can also see, I can't remember if it's in that view or not, I can see the thing that I always complain about has been a problem, which is like, Bungie, what do I need to buy now? Like, I have this, I don't have that, but to get access to all this, do I need to buy the stuff in between or not? And so I can see that, but I still have to like figure out, how, quite frankly, how I feel about the fact that a lot of the stuff is vaulted. Like, I know that there's a way, like, buried somewhere in the UI to get access to some stuff, but not everything. And so, I don't know. It's just this kind of morass of things you have to figure out. But again, if you follow the recommendations, which is just ignore everything that went before, just play the new stuff. Like, constantly, what is the quote from Luke Cage? Always forward. Like, just engage with whatever's new and just keep moving forward and don't worry about any of the stuff from the past. So, but it's been pretty good. It's weird too that they're like, because of the community feedback, they're like unvaulting weapons and they're bringing stuff back that like what, and I'm like, I don't know if that's the thing to do, but having a good time with it regardless. It's the infinite combination of weapons, loadouts, skills, and whatnot that I enjoy. Although I'm playing the hunter now, and those skills, those specials, right, that are the one-shot specials, and like if you hit it and you don't aim right the arrow, like in the split second that you have to aim, like it's useless. Like I'm like, I think I'm just gonna stop using like whatever that is, the arc strider or whatever that specialty is for the hunter, because it's a frustrating.
Oh yeah, with the bow and arrow aspect of it all.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Go back to your golden gun or
Yep.
whatever. No, I mean, yeah, there's lots there. So let's go from one. Almost at this point, I was gonna say Destiny is a long-running franchise because it's getting there, right? We're year 7 of it, but not nearly as long as the Yakuza franchise over with Sega. And Judgement is a spin-off. Judgement, we know, has a sequel coming. Swiss, you're playing some Judgement. Talk us through how's it going? What's keeping you engaged with it?
Just the story. Like actually my wife even likes sitting down and watching. Like it's actually something that even though I'm the only one controlling it, everybody can get into. They have a lot of little mini things going on. Like I helped out like this up and coming singer, and she texted me, so like there was a debate in my family how I should respond to the text message from her. Just little things like that. So in some ways, like there's some serious little side stories, because like a lot of the side stories you're doing like little cases, and there's one where like there's a divorce and there's a kid involved in the divorce and the parents are going back and forth, and you have like the other lawyer has like history with the first lawyer who's your like, so there's like these weird little aspects, and that one's more serious. And then there's another one where like you go into the lawyer's office and there's like a pseudo case that happens because somebody ate the cake that was in the refrigerator, and then they go into this whole like Ace Attorney, like they even do like the objection like, with just the right thing. So there was another game that they like gave a hat tip to, but they have a good sense of humor about it. Like, so there's a nice mix of like you can do some of the goofy stuff, and then there's some of the serious stuff, and then all the while you have like the Yakuza like murder mystery going on in the background. So don't play it wanting to play like a mechanic driven action game. And that was my first, like the first hour or two, that was what I thought I was getting into. And but play it to enjoy just like you're kind of dropped in the world type game, and enjoy the story. So it's nice at the end of the day because it's not too heavy mechanically and skills wise. It's more just like sit on the couch and enjoy yourself. But I know I've been giving little updates. I just wanted to throw the humor out. So
But-
nice. Yeah, I think that one of the Yakuza series kind of traits is some of that humor, and Judgment keeps that. So
I'm saying all this, and I've never played a Yakuza game. So if like people are listening and they're like, "What is this idiot talking about?" Like this is in all the games. Like I'm experiencing this like fresh. So it's been fun.
Well, I think that was part of the design of Judgment, is that you didn't have to. This wasn't a labeled Yakuza numbered series, that you didn't feel like you needed to have previous knowledge coming into it. You could just play Judgment and enjoy it.
But it has great combat, doesn't it?
The combat is button mashy. It feels like a beat 'em up.
Okay, but it's
more.
but the animations are rendered beautifully, right? I mean, does it make you feel like you're like in a Jackie Chan or like a John Woo film, or?
No, it's
Okay.
not that high. It's not that like it's not to that extent.
Okay.
But it's fun to pick up a golf club and smash somebody's face with it. And like
You heard it here first.
they'll do some quick time events basically in some of the combat. So like if you're in just the right position with just the right thing, oh, you can smash triangle, and they'll do like a close up, and okay, and I'll do like some sort of like dive bomb with a bicycle and smash them on the ground, like,
Right.
and they'll have like the nice angle underneath, and it's very comic book. So so the combat, there's enough of that in it to make it fun, but I wouldn't say that the combat mechanics are the driver. It's the humor in it almost, or just like the, I'm beating up some street thugs and smash them through a window at like the whatever the equivalent of the KFC is, and there, and then the store owner doesn't want to talk to me because now they got to figure out how to pay for the windows. So I mean, it's cool.
All right. Thanks, Swiss. And Game Logic, take us home with one more game in the grindy bits, in the play the things you actually enjoy rather than the things you feel compelled to play. So I'm guessing Division 2 jumps back into that. You enjoy it versus feeling that it's the newest, latest, best.
Yeah, although I'm probably going to take this. I should have added it into that rotation of games as a service, even though, I'm not technically into it from that perspective. But I'm probably going to pull it out of the rotation. I've put, I don't know, probably around 60 or 70 hours into that game. And it's heck of fun. I just don't know that there's that much more left for me to extract from it. I have been playing it most recently with a good friend of mine who wanted to play it on PlayStation 5 and was entering it for the first time. But I mean, when she's played it, like, she's been on it. So like she's been playing like every night or every other night, and she has grinded up to level 30 rather quickly. And now, since I've already played through like the vast majority of that content on PC, I was just kind of going into it to get through that co-op. So it's much more so a mechanical and a tactical thing for me than getting through the story pieces of it. We have now stepped across the threshold into the Warlords of New York content.
That's what I was going to ask, if you had a chance to play that expansion.
Yeah, and again, I'm approaching it kind of mechanically, so I haven't really absorbed a ton of the story. But it's what was interesting with that is when we did that transition, she and I were playing, and one other person was playing, and we were playing co-op, and then we hit a mission in the core game that, right, we hit the point where I was like, okay, I've done this enough. I'm fine going to New York if you guys are. And it's just really kind of frictiony, right? How that transition happens. You like when you go from the base game into the Warlords of New York, you can't go into that co-op as far as I can tell. Like, you are, when you go up and you talk to the point of contact at the helicopter pad to engage with that content, you're pulled across. You do not take your party with you. You are dropped into the first combat. You have to grind through that until you get, and it's like 3 or 4 segments of a mission, right? Like where you like on multiple occasions, I was like, I got done, and I open up my social panel, and I'm like, I still can't like invite anybody back into the mission. So you have to go through that until you get to the first kind of settlement, and then people can join you. So it's just a little wonky. And then there are some, when I bought it, you're given a token to like do the auto level up to 30. That invokes a lot of the changes that are involved in the character makeup that you don't have in the core game. And those choices are initially made for you. So like picking your level 30 specialty, which then gives you like a 4th weapon, and some other things, some other skill sets and stuff are just, it just assigned me the demolition subspecialty, and I don't know why. I don't know if it would be somewhat interesting if that were driven by my gameplay style from the core game, but I don't really know. And so you were given that subspecialty. Fortunately, when you get to the settlement, there's a table you can go up to, and a new contact agent who, you can swerve that and pick one of the other 3 subspecialties to get into. But again, you're figuring that out, right? It's like you're not handheld and taken to the table. You're not told that that's a thing you can go do. I just stumbled across it because while I was waiting for the other person to join in and sort their equipment, I was, took the time to go around and see all the people at the tables, and I was like, oh, you can change subspecialties here. So that's a little janky. There was just, when the 3 of us talked about it because we all were kind of seeing the same thing. It's just, there are a lot of choices that are made for you. You're not told what those choices are, right? You're not even told that like a new character parameter or variable has been bolted onto your build, right? And that some field of selections around that were made for you. So it's a little jankier than maybe Ubisoft hoped or thought that it would be. But it's interesting and neat content from a combat perspective. A lot of the geometry was different. You go into like a beach like tanker ship, so it's incredibly vertical as you go around to each level, much more so than some of the other missions. And it's both highly vertical but not that wide from a horizontal perspective. So that fight is a lot different than some other things that I experienced before. So it's just weird how that whole game, there was all this rah-rah and talk about like they had a roadmap and they were going to roll out all this content, and I look back at it, I'm like, am I looking at the store wrong? Is this thing only had like 1 expansion pack? So
yeah, I mean, it had a first season. It had some kind of dungeon-esque things and a couple other side modes, but really after that first expansion pack, there really hasn't been. I mean, there's still been some updates, but not in terms of the content calendar. Yeah.
It's like, I don't get it. There's got to be something. There's got to be a huge variance in how teams. I don't understand the difference between that team and the Rainbow Six team. Like, I don't understand how there could be these years and years and years of like chapter-oriented content and new operators added and all of this like hugely expanded footprint around Siege, and then now twice, essentially, the division has gotten their gumption up about what they were going to do, and then they have just withered on the vine post-launch. It's just a real kind of mystery.
But isn't part of that in the development scope as well? Like for Rainbow Six, you've got operators and you've got maps, and the maps are still relatively self-contained. Where in the division, you have maps, but they are blocks worth of content. There's a lot of other enemy AI going on. The scale of that development feels very different.
It does. It does. And I guess so there are just curious stories where those mysteries haven't been unveiled around that franchise, where the Division 1, the design of that game was incredibly ambitious in terms of you were supposed to link up with friends who could play on an iPad, who they couldn't play like the whole game, but they could like control a drone, right? And then all of that was like eked out and backed away from. and then there was just no content really released for that game. Then, as we stepped up to the plate on Division 2 and went through that dialogue, what I heard in my head and what I thought they were messaging was, hey, we have architected and engineered this thing so that we have the capability to pull levers and twist dials and package and deploy content, right? And yes, Division, I give them full credit. The Division 2 is an incredibly complex game. It looks beautiful after its years of deployment. It amazes me that you go up to these different levels and all of these intricacies of like just what's on the floor is amazing from an engine perspective. But then I'm like, but I thought the whole point of this was like it was all modularized and like you guys could like generate this stuff and then like you could put a story in it, right? That was the whole thing, to containerize, right, that notion of like a bunch of missions and cobble them together and say, here's a new campaign. And it just seems like the execution of that and follow on was much more difficult than they conveyed the consumer base to be pre-launch.
I think there's some of that. I do wonder on the back end how much of Massive's development cycle has really been moving on to other things. Like, is the incentive that there was enough money attached to Avatar to pull them off of supporting the Division? Or was there not enough money in the Division in what they saw from the Warlords of New York to justify continuing on, and it made sense to move on? But yes, I agree that I can think back to, what was that? The winter of 2019. It came out in February, March. There were lots of discussions about they had a full year's worth of content and a plan for second year. And yeah, a lot of discussion around that didn't quite materialize. It doesn't take anything away from the game as it is. It just did not have nearly as long of legs as I think it was hyped to be.
And all of that is being said because I still had tons of fun playing it, and the disappointment that's being voiced in that story is that there doesn't appear to be more legs beyond that.
Okay, well, let's take the hype and the legs and hopefully find some fun in our excitement, or at least our interest in this coming PickZ PlayZ Assignment. So last week we got the announcement of Firaxis's Marvel's Midnight Suns. This week we got some gameplay of it. We get the announcement that the combat is going to be kind of card based and have a number of different aspects there. We see a little bit of the UI. So we got some more details around Midnight Suns. And so what our assignment here is, and I say this as somebody who has bagged and boarded Night Stalkers #1 from 1992 in Rise of the Midnight Suns. So I've got some affinity for this franchise and the Marvel vampire mystical aspects of it, that our assignment this week is to dive into, to go back to something related to something that ties into Marvel's Midnight Suns, that is, whether that is superhero related, whether it's Firaxis and tactical RPG, XCOM related, whether it's deck building and card battling, anything that you can find to kind of find a hook in and connect. So this is a pretty broad stroke here, but that's okay. I'm excited for some comic book geekery. So that is our assignment, gentlemen. Any other thoughts or feeling pretty passionate that you want to call your shot on your assignment? I have not even thought about this one yet. But I definitely will have to.
I don't know. I think I have XCOM 2 sitting in my Steam library untouched, but that's probably the leading candidate for now. We'll see.
That makes sense. It's not going back to Civilization 6 and your multiple crashes and multiplayer problems with it.
I haven't actually picked that up since it kicked me out of the game, of the cloud saves game. So, like, I don't know.
There we go. Shake the dust from your feet. There you go. All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Any other final parting words before we wrap up? Agasicles, Game Logic, Swissguard, any final thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing I'll mention is I actually had like a probably 2 pages worth of things to talk about with regards to season 5 for Call of Duty. So maybe I'll get back around to talking about those with Talmaster at a later stage. But new maps, which are particularly interesting. I'm realizing the more and more time I spend with Call of Duty that part of what it's pulling me back is that there are more complexities around that game and how you level up and how you participate. It's the reason I'm coming back to it. I'm finding out is that it is very much a sport to me. I've made that, hey, this is me going and playing basketball with the guys, every weeknight, during the week, or tennis or whatever. And I'm taking the time to sit down and write these things out, reveal a lot of the things that I've been thinking about the game that I haven't really been articulating. And so season 5, which feels like arguably it would be about where all the juice had been squeezed out of the grapefruit. I'm actually finding that as I go through that analysis and that introspection, that there's a lot of complexities in the new maps. There's a lot of complexities in the new modes and the choices that they're making. We talked about the Division 2 and the fact that there's no content and how you approach that from a modular perspective. There's some interesting choices that they have made from a content perspective in what they deploy from season to season, and where you can kind of quantify and have a yardstick that makes you feel like one season is better than the other. So just an interesting exercise I've been going through.
Yeah, it'd be interesting for the conversation. That's a great segue into our wrap up here. In 2 weeks from now, we'll be back with our next GX show, with our next game experience show, and both Talmaster and Game Logic will be there. So let's call our shot and say that there's going to be some season 5 conversation about Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War in that episode, especially as Tau and Game Logic come together. Next week, it is Talmaster on the mic. So while he's not here tonight, we are assigning him. He is back and hosting a deep dive episode. So that will be episode 209 with a deep dive as we dive into news and analysis. SwissGuard, you will be back here as well on that night. So for myself, DBQ Hams, Game Logic, and SwissGuard, this has been another great discussion, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And it's always on the E2KG network here. Play the games you love those you play with, and be kind to one another. Good night.